Alright, today I'm going to make a Darksaber. This has some influences from the Clone Wars and Rebels Darksaber. The hilt is mostly inspired by The Mandalorian Season 1 and 2. Of course, I had to make some alterations or adjustments just because of budget, how much money I don't have, and also working within my knowledge and skill level as well to construct this. But I feel like it came out pretty good. I didn't have the length of acrylic that I really wanted, so I went with more of a shorter blended blade. And I also didn't realize until after the fact that having the black vinyl, it's black on both sides. I don't know why I thought the adhesive side would be white, but it's not. So that really kills the light dispersion in the blade. So at some point, whenever I have an extra 10 bucks, I'm going to get a roll of white vinyl, and I'll do a layer of white underneath the black, well inside the borders of it, and then the black over top of it. And hopefully that can help disperse the light a bit more throughout the blade, since the all black really does kind of kill that. I also want to experiment with just altering this, putting like some lines and slashes through it, and jagged bits along the edge, and just see how that looks too along with the white. And as I do those things, I'll either post photos to Instagram or YouTube and Facebook as well, in the stories or in the feed, so you can check out any future like updates that I do on this. I've also considered painting these a very dark gray. I just don't have the color of model paint that I want to paint this yet. But the main build is done, and the patterns for the blade and some of these other pieces are up on Facebook. You can go there and download them for your own projects. The handle I pretty much freehanded, and it's all plastic and PVC, so it's a little bit different and difficult to pattern that, I feel like, than foam, since you have to use a lot of intense heat gun applications and things like that to get it to conform to this. Without me rambling anymore, let's just go ahead and get right into the video. Okay, for the blade itself, I have a 1/4 inch thick piece of acrylic, and I'm going to cut it in the shape of a Darksaber blade. And this is only 2 feet long, so I'm going to have to extend this piece to fit it into a hilt so it can light up. But first I'm going to have to cut this, and to cut this I'm going to use a dremel rotary tool with a cutting head. And I'm going to wear a mask that not only has protective lenses, but if you see all these little white bits all over it, that's some of the stuff that goes flying off of this as you're cutting it. And it is basically hot bits of plastic. You don't want it getting in your hair or on your skin or in your eyes or anywhere. It literally burns as it makes contact. So I have to really cover myself to cut this stuff. Okay, I cut it out and then rounded the edges off and roughed them up with my Dremel. And then I also went through and hand sanded all of this, okay, and rounded this off as well. So this is not going to be long enough to actually fit into my hilt. So next I'm going to have to cut a couple pieces that are going to bolt onto this, or rather pin. We'll see exactly what I end up doing, but they're going to go down inside the actual hilt and help fill it out a little bit to make it a bit more stable whenever it's in there. Okay, now that I have the blade cut out, let's go over all the different materials, the basic materials anyways, that I'm going to use to make this. Okay, to light this up, all this is 2 cheap flashlights. Each one of them is supposedly 250 lumens. I don't know if that's true, but they were inexpensive, and I just bought it on blind faith that I would be able to get it to fit inside this tube. And this tube is just a simple, push those out, a simple PVC drain that I picked up from a Home Depot a while ago, and I heated it with my heat gun and stepped on it when it was really, really hot. If you don't get it hot enough, you can crack the pipe pretty easily, but I got it really, really hot so I could flatten it out and give it sort of a katana handle shape. And then I cut 4 lines with the same cutting tool on my Dremel on each side. I don't know if they're supposed to be vents or what they are, but I know they're on the Clone Wars and the Rebels and the Mandalorian Darksaber as well. So that's what that is. I cut it to the length that I desired and cut this angle to match up with the blade, if that makes sense. And sanded it, of course, and all that good stuff. I still have to sand the outside of this. I haven't done that yet. And then these are the other pieces that I had to cut. And they're just going to sandwich, wrong way, like this on the blade. What I'm going to have to do is drill and put some screws or bolts or pins or something in here and here, and then a couple more in here so that this whole assembly just stays together like that. And then I can just slide it in the blade whenever I'm ready to glue all this in place. Since at the end everything's just going to be glued together, I don't, like I said at the beginning of the video, this isn't going to be used for any sort of dueling or sparring. It's not a stunt saber, it's just a prop. You can carry it around and look cool, or stick it on your mantle or shelf or something, hang it on your wall, but that's about it. And this is some matte black vinyl that is typically used for decals, and I'm going to use that to basically cut out the shape of the blade, but a little bit smaller. Basically, I just want it to go along the inside, just a straight line right along here, covering this entire center of the blade on both sides. That way the light is just beaming out around it, and it looks black in the center. So those are all the basic pieces. And I only have patterns for the blade and these 2 supplementary pieces, but if you buy a longer piece than I did, because this was only 2 feet long, if you could get a 2.5 foot or 3 foot, I could have got 3 feet of this, but my only options that I could find were 3 foot by 4 foot, 3 foot by 3 foot, and 3 foot by 2 foot. And they were all really expensive. Okay, I used a drill bit on my Dremel, but of course you could just use a drill if you have a preferred drill, a drill bit for drilling into plastics. And I drilled holes and put screws into it. 4 on this side and 4 on this side. I kind of put them at slightly differing angles, relatively straight, but not totally straight. And it ended up giving it a nice, firm feel, and it does still fit inside of here. Now, as far as the type of screws I used, they're screws that I scavenged from Nerf blasters. Okay, the next piece I've cut out is the guard, the hand guard, and this is 1/8 inch thick acrylic. And I could not cut this round, by the way. I drew the shape, I cut the inside of it out, and then I used the dremel to round it as much as possible. And then I rounded this side at this angle, and this side at this angle. Because how it's going to go on the hilt, put it right, there we go. It's going to go on the hilt at an angle. So me sanding it like that helps it just get a little bit flush there. It gives me some place to put the glue in. But before I actually put this on, glue it on, line it up, do any of that stuff, I need to do two things. One is sand this entire thing and rough it up. And I need to heat it right across here and bend it so that it's going to stand straight up like this. And for that, I'm going to use my heat gun. Okay, it's been heated, and I ran my Sharpie around it just so it showed up a little bit better on camera. And I also glued it on. And to glue it on, I just use regular old crazy glue and baking soda. So how I do that is, once I get it lined up and positioned where I want it, I take and just drip some crazy glue down into it. Then I just take and sprinkle some baking soda into that and just kind of do it until it builds up, kind of like a bead on a weld almost. And it's kind of what I think of as a plastic weld. But it hardens as hard as glass, so it's not going anywhere. And I'm, of course, not perfect at this. So I'm going to have to go back through and hand sand all around here just to make sure I can get this all as smooth and even as possible. Okay, I've started gluing on some accent pieces here, and up here. And part of these I'm cutting out of the remainder of the tube that I'd cut off the bottom of this. And just some other pieces of PVC and plastic. And you'll notice these aren't very long. So I literally have to kind of like piece these together and then fill the gaps and sand it out. And what I'm using to glue it on is Gorilla Super Glue. But I also have this to finish it with and fill the gaps, along with the baking soda, which I'm going to show you right now. First, all my areas are sanded and roughed up. They're not sanded with like 600 grit. They're sanded with rough grit sandpaper. And so is the inside of this piece here where I'm going to glue it. If it looks shiny and smooth, rough it up. And the more that you rough this up with the sandpaper, the better this will work. Okay, put on my super glue and line this up. Make sure it's even, both sides and the center. Yeah. Now, the reason why I'm using this specifically is it's not gel. It is a little thicker, though, viscosity, than, say, just regular old crazy glue, which is very thin. And some of my favorite stuff to use is the ultra thin super glue, which unfortunately I'm out of, but you've seen that if you've watched some of my other Mandalorian videos. But this is pretty thin, and it's like water. This stuff is a little thicker. It does take a bit longer. Like, I had to hold this for a while. They say up to 60 seconds. I feel like this plastic being sanded and roughed up like that bonds pretty well, so I didn't actually have to wait a full 60 seconds. Once I have my piece glued in place, I will take this thinner crazy glue and just put a little bit of it on the outside edge here. If for whatever reason there happens to be any gaps between the main hilt and the accent piece, the super glue can kind of run down in there, help to make sure this outside edge stays sealed and glued. But like down in here, you can see where I glued these together. There's gaps. I've started to fill this one right here. I'm going to have to sand it flush. This one I already filled and sanded a bit, but I need to do a bit more to it. This one, same thing. I did fill it a bit. But this one right here, the gap is deep enough that I can stick my fingernail in it. So I put super glue and just sprinkle in some baking soda like that. Blow off the excess. A little more super glue. A little more baking soda. Okay. That gap's filled. Still needs sanded. This one needs a little bit more. Since I ran out of glue last night and had to go pick more up today, I didn't quite get this done. There. Now this one here I've already sanded and filled, and these two, this was slightly thicker than this, so I had to like literally layer on the super glue and the baking soda to get this to like smooth out. And it still looks, I feel, probably pretty disjointed on the camera, but we'll see how smooth it is whenever I primer all this one color. So now that that's done, I'm just going to do a whole bunch of sanding. And the next accent pieces I'm going to piece together are basically going to come straight down and then go straight across like this and back up. It's going to do that again. And there's going to be one just bar right in the center here. There's no patterns for this because I'm freehanding this off of junk that I have. And I also don't even really know. I guess I could take and make fake pieces out of paper. So if you had strips of plastic, you could cut it to wrap around this. But I don't even know how much heating it would take to properly curve a piece of straight plastic to fit around this. Probably a lot. That's why I'm using things that are already circular so that I don't have to worry about bending it. The other thing is, how do you heat this and curve it this way? It's not foam. And you have to get this plastic really, really, really hot. Like I say, to the point where you could burn out your heat gun, or you could like catch something on fire, or if you're not thinking, touch the heat gun and burn yourself very badly because you're pushing it to levels that are pretty rough. So yeah, sanding, and if any of these feel uneven, I'll just go add a little bit more super glue and a little bit more baking soda. If there's like a pit or a hole or a gap, then I just start sanding again. Right, I finished cutting out and gluing on all my accents and then filling in the gaps and sanding as best as I could. So I even put a little button on here. And next, cardboard tube shoved in here so I can hold it while I paint it. And I'm painting it with Duplicolor vinyl and fabric specialty coating. This is meant for plastics, vinyls, things like that. It works great on things that are plastic that don't like to be painted. Primarily things like Nerf blasters, that type of mold injected plastic, PVC, anything like that. So this is after a second coat. I generally will give this 2 coats. The first one gets absorbed pretty well, and that's the thing about this stuff versus normal spray paint. Normal spray paint, whether it's acrylic or enamel, forms on top of stuff, whereas this stuff is super thin, like water, and that's part of the reason why I sand the plastic with with rougher sandpaper really well, because it absorbs into it. Another thing to note about this stuff is that it tends to dry rather quickly. With 1 coat, dries to the touch in about 15-20 minutes. I only let it sit about an hour between coats. And unlike other spray paints, it doesn't really matter when you recoat it. With other spray paints, if you don't recoat it, like within 1 hour of the first coat, or after like 48 or 72 hours, depending upon your humidity levels, you'll get wrinkles and cracks. However, I am going to let this sit for 24 hours until I start using it, as far as like gluing stuff in it. And while I wait on the hilt to dry, I can go ahead and figure out my vinyl and stick it to the blade. But how I did that was I took a piece of clear packing tape and put it all along the length of this, and then I just drew a straight line along the inside of the edge here that I sanded on it that I want to light up. And that's how I determined where I wanted it. I then peeled that piece of tape off very carefully and stuck it on 3 pieces of paper back to back and cut that shape out. And that'll act as my stencil. Okay, the decals have been applied now. It was pretty tricky. I had to use a credit card and smooth it out as I went. I did use a cell phone screen cleaner that you use whenever you're going to put on a screen protector to clean this. If I didn't have that, I just would have used Windex or alcohol. So I left it basic, but you could, of course, do whatever you want to yours as far as even cutting these into pieces with gaps in between and slashes and whatever else. Next thing I did was put my flashlights in and glue them into place. And how I did that was I wrapped both flashlights side by side with some strips of 5mm white EVA foam. The reason why I use white is because white is reflective. Hopefully you can see down in there. And it also formed a nice tight seal, so it won't let any light escape out the back here. And it'll also stop adhesive from leaking down and messing up my lights, because I don't want that. So I wrapped around the end and I wrapped around the center. It was nice and tight. Then I used some 2-part epoxy and just mixed it and dribbled it down in there until it came up reasonably high on this. So I feel like it was going to hold it in place really good. And yeah, that's pretty much it for that. Inserting the blade and putting my screws in to hold the blade in place, and then capping this off so the light doesn't come out, and that'll be pretty much it. I did end up putting another ring onto this and gluing it in place. I had to sand off and then repaint it. Now this part here is not permanent, it is just pressure fit. I just pull this out and it pops right out, and then I can easily access both of the batteries. And as far as this up here, I capped it by just using some 2mm EVA foam. In fact, you can see right here where I cut it out. All I did was put it on here and press, and it'll make an impression in your foam, and then I cut out the piece. Now I specifically again used white so it helped refract the light as much as possible, because the black from this is of course just eating away the light, but it does still illuminate rather evenly from end to end. Let me turn off the bright. Okay, that's like normal household lighting. So it's not amazing, but it's not terrible. But what I want to know is, can I do an Obi Annie spin with this like I would do with a normal lightsaber? Oh, and if you're wondering, lights out. That's lights out. Lights out. Moderate light. Okay, I guess the answer to that is yes. Yes, I can. To be honest, I probably wouldn't spin this as fast as what I would any other stunt saber. If I would go too fast and this would slip out of my hand, I'm very worried that when this blade impacted with something, it would chip or crack or break or splinter, or I don't know what. Okay, that's going to pretty much wrap it up for this video. Hopefully this gave you some ideas for your own projects. Took your mind off the current situation, if it's not the happiest one, like for many of us. If you would like to attempt to make one of your own, I'll put some links below to some of the stuff that I use in this, but like I've kind of mentioned throughout the video, if you have access to things like a soldering iron and can solder, then you could make a much cooler one than this. But this is a very bargain basement starting point. I feel like that still comes out being relatively sturdy, but looks decent. I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. And like I said, there's links to the patterns. So if you did enjoy this video, please leave a like. And if you're not subscribed, please do so, as it does help out the channel a lot and helps me to make videos like this and get more content to you watching at home. And as always, thank you and have a great day.